Hey, good morning. Welcome, great to see you. Little different today. We have a special speaker. Because of that, we're gonna do things at the end a little differently. So we're gonna do some Q&A. If you have some questions, write them down. There is a microphone right over here. So after Dr. Ross is done, you can come up. He'll provide a time to answer some questions. We'll take as many as we can. We have kids ministry, so kids have to, before they take our volunteers hostage, we have to get them back where they belong. So we'll do as much as we can. Communion is gonna be on your own after the service. If you want to take the bread and the cup, then feel free after the service to come up and receive and take the bread and cup. That's there for you. So we get the privilege of hearing from a guy that I was able to spend just a little bit of time with him last night. And what I loved was after service, he had already done 2 hours, and there was about 40 minutes where he just talked with people, and I was able to listen to him talk to people. And you'll know he loves the Bible, and he loves science, loves creation, loves God, and he loves people. And what more could you want than that? So please welcome Dr. Hugh Ross.
Well, as you heard last night, I've been studying astrophysics since I was 7 years of age. But I think I'm kind of like you. When you look at the universe, you have to wonder, what is there beyond the universe? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to have some time for Q&A, but I put this slide up just to let you know I do take questions on my Facebook and Twitter pages, so you're welcome to take advantage of that. We also have a 24/7 YouTube channel, so you're welcome to subscribe to that. There's literally thousands of videos that you can watch of me debating various people, including, probably the most fun one. Look at the debate between me and Peter Atkins at Oxford University. He was a chemist. It's actually quite a humorous debate. So, and if you scan this QR code, you can get a free book at our table at the back. The book is Testable Faith. It's a brand new edition, so do take advantage of that. But what is there beyond the cosmos? And what we've recently discovered in both particle physics and cosmology is that there are dimensions beyond length, width, height, and time. So I'm going to talk about the recent scientific discoveries that reveal about these dimensions and what they say about God's glory and power. Well, today we radio astronomers actually have the capacity to map the radiation left over from the cosmic creation event. This is what that map actually looks like. And I was studying the Bible during my late teenage years at the same time that physicists in Britain and South Africa were developing the first of the space-time theorems. Today, we have over 30 of these space-time theorems. And just for your privilege, I brought with me the most famous of these theorems. It's got an amazing title, Inflationary Space-Times Are Not Past Incomplete. I mean, you gotta love the titles that these scientists put on their papers, right? But the equations here are just gorgeous. You have to look at the beauty of these equations, which is really incredible. But this paper ends with a paragraph that we can all understand. Namely, what they proved is that any universe that expands on average over its history implies a causal agent outside of space, time, matter, and energy. Basically, they demonstrated the cause of matter, energy, space, and time is some kind of agent beyond space, time, matter, and energy. And, when I was kind of looking at this in my late teenage years, what I realized is, because I studied the other holy books first. I was not raised in a Christian home, but through my studies in astrophysics, realized the universe had a beginning. Therefore, there had to be a cosmic beginner. Didn't really know where to look. There weren't Christians in our neighborhood. So I said, well, I guess a good place to start is Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. And after all, he's the father of cosmology. but it didn't really match what we now know to be true about the universe. Then I began to go through the world's holy books. But when I picked up the Bible, and I was given a Gideon Bible in my public school, when I picked up that Bible, I realized this book stands alone. The other religions speak about God or gods creating within space and time. The Bible stands alone in saying that there's a beginning to space and time and that God was operating before space and time. And what also impressed me is that Alexander Vilenkin, one of the three authors of this amazing space-time theorem, wrote a book a year later. Now, he's an agnostic astrophysicist, but this is what he said in his book. Quote, "With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." Now, he didn't really identify what that problem is, but I'll identify it for you. The problem is a God beyond space and time must have created our universe of matter, energy, space, and time. And this is now even being conceded by the world's leading atheist scientists. Probably the best known one here in America would be Lawrence Krauss. And he wrote a book, but this is what he said on page 173 of that book. "One cannot rule out such a deistic view of nature. Based on the force of the space-time theorems, he recognized that we have to concede that there must be some kind of agent outside of space and time that created our universe of matter, energy, space, and time." And I'll tell you a story. I got to speak at NASA Houston, but the director came up to me just before I got up to speak and said, "This is a federal laboratory. You can't use the word God here." I said, "Well, I don't see that in the Constitution." He says, "I don't care about the Constitution. You can't use the word God in this audience." I says, "Well, can I talk about the agent beyond space and time that created the universe of space, time, matter, and energy and designed it so that we human beings can thrive in it?" He says, "Yeah, you can do that." And the power of these theorems, they're based on only two assumptions. The first assumption is the theorem is true if the universe contains mass. And every one of you here is living proof that the universe contains mass. A few of you a little more so than others. The second assumption is that the equations of general relativity reliably describe the movements of massive bodies in the universe. Now, when I was 19 years of age, we could only prove that to 1% precision. Today, we can prove it to 16 places of the decimal. So there's no basis now for doubting that indeed there is a beginning to space and time and an agent beyond space and time that created our universe. But you know, the Bible said it first. If I had said it in the very first page, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I was reading the Bible and saying, what are these heavens and earth? And as I read through the Old Testament, I realized it never uses the word universe. Biblical Hebrew does not have a word for the universe, but they have this idiomatic phrase, the heavens and the earth. It's used 13 times in the Old Testament. If you look up all of those texts, you see that it's a phrase that refers to the entirety of physical reality, all matter, energy, space, and time. Now, in the New Testament, based on Greek, they do have a word for the universe. It's the word cosmos. But notice what it says in Hebrews 11:3. It says the universe was formed at God's command, so what was seen, namely what was detected, was not made from what we can see and detect. Well, what can we detect? We can detect matter, energy, space, and time. So it's basically saying that's not where the universe came from. It came from beyond matter, energy, space, and time. What also struck me about the Bible compared to all the other holy books that undergirds the world's religions, the Bible alone speaks about God's activities before he created space and time. God was in a relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, before they created anything. And you've got passages like this in the Bible, 2 Timothy 1:9. The grace that we Christians now experience was given to us before the beginning of time. In other words, before God created the universe, he was already working out the idea of bestowing grace among creatures that would exist in the universe. He had that all worked out before he created space and time. You've got Titus 1:2, which says that the hope that we share in Jesus Christ was given to us before the beginning of time. And there's 8 other places in the Bible that talks about what God was doing before he created time. Now, whenever I lay this out to an audience of scientists, they always respond with a question. Okay, we get all this evidence that God designed this universe and created the universe. But who created and designed God? If God created the universe, who created God? Probably the most famous person who threw out that challenge is Richard Dawkins, where he said, hey, I can't believe in God because, yes, if he created everything, who created him? Well, it's not just Richard Dawkins that asks that question. Almost everybody asks that question at one point in their life. Our 2 sons asked me that question when they were 3.5 years of age. And I'll give a tip to you parents. When your kids ask you a really tough question, don't delay. Don't say wait till you're older when you can understand. You need to answer the question the moment they ask it. Who created God? And I basically explained to my sons at age 3.5 that God's in a different category than we human beings are. And that's the mistake Richard Dawkins made. He didn't recognize God's in a different category than we human beings. Now, how I explained that to my 2 sons, as I said, well, let me talk about space. We have length, we have width, we have height. So I kind of talked to them about the 3 dimensions of space. And so God created those dimensions. He created time, which means he's not subject to time like we are. And the irony of Richard Dawkins saying, if God created the universe, who created God? He's overlooking something. Any entity constrained to a single dimension of time, where time can't be stopped or reversed, must have a beginning, must be created somewhere along that line of time. That applies to the entire universe. It applies to everything in the universe. So the very question is a proof that there must be a God. Now, how I explained it to my sons is I said, well, okay, we're in just this one dimension of time, but God is not constrained. So I said, have you ever thought about this? Here we are on this line of time. In a plane of time, God could exist on another line of time that could be infinitely long and never crosses or touches our line of time. As such, he would have no beginning, he would have no ending, he would be uncreated. Any entity in one line of time must be created. An entity that's in a plane of time or a volume of time would not be so constrained. And so my sons were saying, yeah, that's good. They understood. They were fine. So, but there was another evening where they said, Dad, Mom, you have us pray every night. What happens if all the kids in the world pray to God at the same time? And I says, yeah, that's a really good question. There's 8 billion people on the surface of the earth. What if all 8 billion of us pray to God at the same time? Isn't that going to jam up God's phone lines? So, but then I was able to explain, look, remember we talked about how God moves and operates in at least the equivalent of 2 dimensions of time? If that's the case, we could be existing on this line of time, and we stop here, and 8 billion of us all pray to God at the same time. But because he's got access to an infinitely long line perpendicular to ours, he can give 20 minutes of undivided attention to 8 billion people in a single second in our time. And they nodded their heads and said, oh yeah, I understand that. And it gave them confidence that God really does listen to the prayers that they utter every night and every second in their life. And I found out later, kids get this way more easily than adults do. Because I wound up doing an experiment on my sons when they were just born, and basically took their toys and made a 2-dimensional cut of the toys that was the same size and the same color. The first couple of months out of the womb, they couldn't tell the difference. But by the time they were 5 and 6 months of age, they knew the difference between a two-dimensional cutout and a three-dimensional toy, which told me in the womb, they're kind of in a two-dimensional space frame, but when they come out of the womb, they move into a three-dimensional space frame. And so they're only a few months or a few years removed from that experience. Those of you who are 50 years of age or older, you've been in a three-dimensional rut for 4 or 5 decades. So it's harder for you to make that jump than it is for little kids. Just a little tip there. Okay. Well, we know that God's not constrained to a single dimension of time. We now know that God is not constrained to 3 dimensions of space. And it's all because of the Large Hadron Collider. It's this amazing particle accelerator that was built in Switzerland and in France. It's a 17-mile circle where they accelerate these particles to very high velocities. And using particle accelerators like the Large Hadron Collider, physicists recognize that there's simply not enough room within the dimensions of length, width, and height for all the symmetries required to have quantum mechanics and gravity coexist. And they must coexist. You can't have life in the universe without gravity. You can't have life in the universe without quantum mechanics. They both have to coexist. But they can only coexist if there's more dimensions of space than just length, width, and height. And I was at Caltech when there was a team of theoretical physicists who were beginning to work on this problem. And initially they figured out, okay, we know it has to be at least 8 dimensions of space, and it might be as many as 26 dimensions of space. And some of these theoretical physicists were Bible-believing Christians. In fact, one of them now is the chairman of the physics department at Baylor University. We were friends at that time at Caltech. And so he was saying, we think it's going to take us about 40 or 50 years to figure this all out. Well, they managed to do it in just 10 years. And they figured the right answer is there's 3 big dimensions of space and 6 really tiny dimensions of space. And this concept enabled us to actually consistently integrate our cosmic creation model with our particle creation model. And how it all works out, the universe begins with 9 dimensions of space that rapidly expand from the cosmic creation event. And the universe begins with just one force of physics. But as the universe expands, it gets cooler and cooler. And the first force to separate out is gravity. But when gravity separates out from the other 3 forces of physics, 6 of those 9 dimensions stop expanding. So 3 have been expanding ever since. 6 are the same size they were when the universe was 1/10,000,000th of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second old. And you say, well, where are these extra dimensions? Well, they're wrapped up very tightly around the 3 big dimensions that are continuing to expand. But they're wrapped up so tightly that the cross-section is only, it's 20 orders of magnitude smaller than the diameter of an electron, which probably explains why many of us haven't noticed these extra 6 dimensions, because of how incredibly tiny they are. But they're absolutely critical to understand how we can both have the particles we need for life and the universe that we need for life. But this tells us that God must be a being that transcends 10 dimensions of space and time. So we're now looking at a much bigger God than what we could physically conceive of even just 30 years ago. So where is this God? Well, it tells us that God must be able to move and operate within the dimensions that he created, but clearly he created them from outside those dimensions. So he exists both within and beyond those dimensions. But the Bible said it long before physicists and astronomers discovered this. What we see in the Bible is a statement that God is simultaneously and continuously both immanent and transcendent. And the doctrine of the immanence of God is that God is everywhere within his creation. The doctrine of transcendence is that he's totally free to operate without restriction, totally outside of everything he created. And this is unique to the Bible. What you find in the Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism is that God is within the universe, but he's not transcendent. He's one with the universe. What you see in Islam is that God is transcendent, but he's not immanent. So in Islam, God is distant, unreachable, untouchable, because he permanently exists outside of the universe that he created. Only in Christianity do you have this doctrine that God is simultaneously and continuously both immanent and transcendent. And I'll give you a couple of passages. This one is from Jeremiah, where we see, "Can anyone hide in secret places so that I cannot see him, declares the Lord? Do not I fill heaven and earth?" Basically making the point that God exists everywhere, continuously within every part of the universe. 2 trillion galaxies, he exists completely within all those galaxies. He's everywhere here on earth. King David put it this way in Psalm 139, "If I go up to the heavens, you are there." Let me go back one here. Let me see. Come on. "If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." And we see in 1 Kings, the heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. He's not constrained by anything in the universe. Or we see in the book of Job, the Almighty is beyond our reach. He's outside of the universe. Or what Paul says in Timothy, God whom no man has seen nor can see, basically making the point it's impossible for any of us to see God or to touch God. And yet there's over a dozen places in the Bible where it talks about how close God is to each one of us. The Lord is near. You see this repeated throughout the Psalms. Or what you see in the book of Acts, in Peter's sermon, it says, he is not far from each one of us. In fact, what the Bible tells us is that God is physically closer to us than we are to one another. And I can see that some of you here are sitting close together. God is sitting closer to you than anyone who has sat closer to you in your entire life. He's right there, a centimeter away, a millimeter away from each one of us, and he's that far away throughout our whole life. And I'm not just saying spiritually, he's that far away physically, yet it's impossible for us to see him or touch him. Now, I brought with me this morning a couple that has a sphere handicap. Their handicap is they're limited to only 2 dimensions of space. So I want to introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. Flat. They only have 2 dimensions of space, and we're going to put them in this flat universe here. Now, I can put my hand 1 millimeter above Mr. and Mrs. Flat. I'm now physically, tangibly closer to them than they are to one another. But because I'm above the 2-dimensional frame in which they're constrained, they can't see me, they can't touch me. This is the way it is with God. Because he's extra-dimensional, trans-dimensional, he can literally be a millimeter away from you throughout your entire life. If you can't see him, you can't touch him. Now, it also tells us that man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. In other words, God knows and understands us better than we know and understand one another. Well, let's look at Mrs. Flat. She's trying to perceive her husband, and so she looks at him and says, oh, you're a nice long line. Now, as she walks around him, she says, oh, from this perspective, you're a shorter line. She can continue walking around him and get different line lengths. And in her 2-dimensional brain, spending an hour or 2, she can calculate the outer outline of her husband. But notice, as a 3-dimensional being, I don't have to do all of that. Right away, I can see the entire outline. But I also see something they don't ever see. I can see the insides of Mrs. Flatt. I see it immediately. They can never see that. I can see things about them they can never see about themselves. The same thing is true of God with respect to us. Becoming a follower of Jesus Christ is basically committing yourself to follow the direction that Jesus has for your life. You make him the master of your life, the boss of your life. Why? Because he knows better than you do what's best for you. He knows and understands us better. So it only makes rational sense to have him in charge of your life rather than you running your life, because he knows better than you do what's best for you, what's good for you. Now, the other thing we notice is that the Bible is unique in telling us that God is three persons and one essence. What you see in the other religions is where God is either a single person, like you see in Judaism and Islam, or what you see in the Eastern religions where there's millions of gods. Well, let me use Mr. and Mrs. Flatt to make the point. I can put a finger through the plane. She comes and investigates and sees that I'm a small circle. We ran into the same problem with Jesus of Nazareth. He humbled himself and lowered himself and became a human and lived amongst us. We can look at Jesus of Nazareth and draw the mistake that we're seeing the totality of God. We're seeing a cross-section of God, just like Mrs. Flatt is seeing a cross-section of my physical being. Now, I could go to Mr. Flatt, only this time I put three fingers through the plane. He would come and investigate and draw the conclusion, I'm three small circles. His wife, of course, would challenge him and say, oh no, I had a revelation. God is one person. Husband, you're wrong. It's not three, it's one circle. This debate could go on for 4 hours on Saturday. Come Sunday, she goes to the church of the one circle. He goes to the church of the three circles, which is what people have done with God. They either worship God as multiple persons, independent of one another, or they worship him as one person. The Bible tells us it's three distinct persons, but they all have the same character attributes. They all have the same mind. They all have the same purposes. And so they're unified in what they think creation should look like. One article you'll find on our reasons.org website, Why Science Only Makes Sense of God as Triune. If you've got multiple persons involved in independent ways with creation, then creation is going to be filled with incongruities and inconsistencies and things that are not harmonious. When we look at science, we realize none of that is true. Everything is consistent and harmonious. It has the signature of being created by a single mind with a single set of purposes. But the problem with Islam and Judaism, they have no explanation for the origin of love. Because love, by definition, is one person expressing love to another person, or receiving love from that person. If God is all by himself, with no other person around, there is no love. And so in Islam, the only way God can experience love is to create beings that have free will, that can receive and experience love. In Christianity, creation is a choice. God didn't need to create. He was already experiencing love to the ultimate possible limit. And for him, creation is a choice. And in Christianity, we got an explanation. God, in fact, the problem with Islam is this. They say nothing is greater than God, but we humans are able to experience love, whereas God, before he created, could not. So it actually contradicts the mantra of Islam. Now, I have found that the greatest challenge in the doctrines we see taught in the Bible is the one that declares that God has granted us human beings free will. And if it weren't for free will, there'd be no possibility for love. In fact, God gave us strong free will because his desire was that we would have strong love. But he also declares that he has predetermined everything. He predestinates, he predetermines. He literally predetermines every action we perform, every word that we speak, and every thought that we think. He's in total control. He is sovereign. You'll find 1,500 passages in the Bible that teach that we humans possess free will and will be held accountable for the decisions that we make. You'll also find about 1,500 passages that say that God predetermines everything. And you'll even find 8 verses in the Bible that teach both in the same sentence. So you can't duck this. The Bible really does teach both. It's the only holy book that teaches both. It's impossible to reconcile these two doctrines in length, width, height, and time. But if we allow God to be extra-dimensional and trans-dimensional, there's multiple ways you can have your cake and eat it too. And so I want you to visualize here a 3-dimensional ball. But it's not a 3-dimensional ball of space, it's a 3-dimensional ball of time. So we're going to conceive of time having 3 dimensions. And so this line here basically shows you the timeline of the universe. And we're going to put you on this timeline of the universe. And we can put God at the North Pole of that sphere of time. And he can drop a perpendicular timeline to the moment that you were conceived in your mother's womb. We have another perpendicular timeline that drops down to the present moment. And another perpendicular timeline that drops down to the day that you'll pass from this life into the next life. What you notice here is that all these different moments in time in your life can be met at a single instant of time on this sphere of time, which means from one instant, God can simultaneously see all the moments in your life and all the moments in the history of the universe. And he can control them all from a single instant of time. And you see this throughout the Bible, that God knows the exact hour when you're going to be born. He knows the exact hour when you're going to die. And he's in control of all that. We don't have to worry about how many days we're going to live. God has that all under control. And you notice here, these 3 moments in your timeline, they all meet together at a single instant at this North Pole of time. Now, this is a short demonstration that helps you visualize what you see in the early part of the book of Ephesians, that God foreknows everything. He has knowledge of the past, he has knowledge of the future. But we also see in Ephesians, God not only foreknows, he predetermines. He is in total control over all our thoughts, words, and actions, and yet we have free will. And we need to have these doctrines in tension, because if we focus entirely on human free will, we think it's all up to us. And therefore, we wind up becoming legalistic, developing all these rules, trying to keep the rules, and we panic when we fail to keep the rules. But the problem is if you focus entirely on predetermination, then you say, well, it's all under God's control, I don't have to worry. And you begin to say, my sin doesn't count. God's got it all under control. You fall into the problem of license. The Christian walk is keeping both doctrines in balance, so we don't shift towards legalism and we don't shift towards license. And only in the Bible do we have those 2 doctrines taught as simultaneously. Now, I don't have the time to give you some examples of how you can actually have both human free will simultaneously and continuously operating with God predetermining everything. But hey, I've done this all in a book. It's called Beyond the Cosmos, and we're actually giving away a free chapter from that book, chapter 13. And that chapter is a chapter where I give you 3 different ways in the context of 3 independent dimensions of time, how God can actually give all of us free will while he controls everything that happens in our life from the beginning to the end, and the same thing for the universe. And incidentally, my 3 demonstrations may not be correct, because there's millions of ways God can pull this out if he is both extra-dimensional and trans-dimensional. I just give you the 3 easy ones that you can read and say, oh yeah, that all works, and realize there could be many other ways God could pull it off. So I'm okay with being wrong. I'm just saying it's possible. We also have a little video on this called Beyond the Cosmos. And I made this video so that you can watch it a couple of times. You can give the same lecture you've heard me give today. and you can give it in a way that's understandable for children. This is basically designed for a younger audience. But one of the breakthroughs of my coming to faith in Christ, I was a sophomore physics student at the University of British Columbia, and they offered this course on extra-dimensional mathematics. And I said, well, this ought to be fun. It turned out to be the most grueling math course I ever took. In fact, we had to have a tutorial at 6:30 on Sunday in order to be able to keep up with what was being taught in that class. But what it revealed to me is that we human beings can only visualize phenomena and dimensions we experience. And we see in the Bible is it teaches doctrines that can't be visualized from length, width, height, and time. Whereas in all the other religions, 100% of what they teach can be understood from length, width, height, and time. And what this taught me was that the Bible is unique, extra-dimensional doctrines, unique descriptions of extra-dimensional events, proves its content did not come from a mere human source. It defies the limits of human visualization. So unlike, say, the Hindu Vedas or the Quran, we recognize the message of the Bible must come from a being that transcends what we human beings can visualize. So it demonstrated the Bible amongst all these holy books is the only one that has the possibility of coming from the creator of the universe. So it was a huge step in my conversion of giving my life to Jesus Christ. Again, you can get this free book at our table outside. And hey, if they run out, just give them your address. They'll mail it to you. But I want to end with a demonstration of what was going on with Jesus. Because I've run into a lot of skeptics who say, hey, Christianity is founded on the belief that Jesus on the cross paid the atonement price for every human being who ever lived. And hey, the penalty for all the offenses that we committed against God and against other people is an eternity of torment. How can God, because what we see in the Gospels, he only spent 6 to 9 hours on the cross. How can those 6 to 9 hours he could possibly suffer to a sufficient degree to pay the equivalent of eternal torment for 100 billion human beings have lived since God created Adam and Eve? Well, the one that was dying on the cross was human, but he was also God. And as God, he had the capability of suffering like no human could suffer. And many of us have read those passages in the Gospels where Jesus was sweating, literally, drops of blood because of the agony he knew he was going to have to face on the cross. Well, I want you to look at the screen and imagine that we have a line of time going from behind the screen out to the screen as far as you can imagine. So here we have this line of time going behind the screen and out from the screen. And in this line of time, our line of time, we have Christ spending 6 to 9 hours on the cross. But because this is God dying on the cross, he had access to another dimension of time that runs up and down along the plane of the screen. And that could be infinitely long. He also has access to a dimension of time that runs across the screen. And across that screen, he could literally be suffering for infinite time on 100 billion parallel lines of time. And all of that can be compressed from God's perspective into our perspective into just 6 to 9 hours. And so this actually demonstrates, one way that it demonstrates how in just 6 to 9 hours, he could pay for an eternity of torment for billions of people who have lived. And one of my passages I like to share with unbelievers is this one from the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 2:3. How shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? If we actually measure the degree to which Christ suffered on the cross on our behalf, how can we actually turn down such an incredible offer? And so, therefore, I just want to leave this with you. This is a way of understanding what Christ did for each one of us. And we're going to be taking communion in a few minutes. That's something I want you to think about as you take communion. This is what Christ did so we can be delivered from all of our sin and evil. In fact, before we go to the Q&A, I just want to make a short prayer. Father in heaven, we want to thank you for your willingness not only to create the universe and create a beautiful home in which we can live and enjoy, especially in this Rogue River Valley. We want to thank you for the fact that you chose to leave your abode, come here on earth, live amongst us, demonstrate a life of moral perfection, but actually trade your moral perfection for a moral imperfection by dying on the cross in all these extra dimensions or trans dimensions so that we can be delivered from our sin and evil. Thank you for giving us such an incredible gift, and help us, Lord, to appreciate the magnitude of what you offered and to receive the totality of what you offered. In Jesus' name, amen.